Hello friends and welcome. Today we shall talk about de Broglie's relation, Heisenberg uncertainty principle and need of a new approach to atomic structure. Now the main objectives of today's deliberation are: number first, to give a general and thorough idea about the concept of matter. Number second, we shall be explaining in detail the facts about de Broglie's relation. Number third, we will discuss in detail the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Number fourth, we will give a general idea about the atomic structure, and finally we shall be discussing in detail the need of a new approach to atomic structure. Now let us begin with the introduction about the concept of matter. All matter can exhibit wave-like behavior. For example, a beam of electrons can be diffracted just like a beam of light or a water wave. Matter waves are a central part of the theory of quantum mechanics, being an example of wave-particle duality. The concept that matter behaves like a wave is also referred to as the de Broglie hypothesis due to having been proposed by Louis de Broglie in 1924. Matter waves are often referred to as de Broglie waves. The de Broglie wavelength is the wavelength lambda associated with the massive particle and is related to its momentum p through the Planck's constant h. Lambda is equal to h divided by p. Wave-like behavior of matter was first experimentally demonstrated by George Paget Thomson's thin metal diffraction experiment and independently in the Davison-Germer experiment, both using electrons, and it has also been confirmed for other elementary particles, neutral atoms and even molecules. The wave-like behavior of matter is crucial to the modern theory of atomic structure and particle physics. At the end of the 19th century, light was thought to consist of waves of electromagnetic fields which propagated according to Maxwell's equations, while matter was thought to consist of localized particles. In 1900, this division was exposed to doubt when investigating the theory of black body thermal radiation. Max Planck proposed that light is emitted in discrete quanta of energy. It was thoroughly challenged in 1905. Extending Planck's investigation in several ways, including its connection with the photoelectric effect, Albert Einstein proposed that light is also propagated and absorbed in quanta. Light quanta are now called as photons. These quanta would have an energy given by the Planck-Einstein equation, that is, E is equal to nu and a momentum p is equal to E divided by c is equal to h divided by lambda, where v, which is also known by the lowercase Greek letter nu, and lambda denote the frequency and wavelength of the light, c is the speed of light and h is the Planck's constant. De Broglie in his 1924 PhD thesis proposed that just as light has both wave-like and particle-like properties, electrons also have wave-like properties. By rearranging the momentum equation stated in the just mentioned section, we find a relationship between the wavelength lambda associated with an electron and its momentum p through the Planck constant h, which is given by lambda is equal to h divided by p. The relationship is now known to hold for all types of matter, that is, all matter exhibits properties of both particles and waves. Matter waves were first experimentally confirmed to occur in George Paget Thomson's cathode ray diffraction experiment and the Davison-Germer experiment for electrons, and the de Broglie hypothesis has been confirmed for other elementary particles. Furthermore, neutral atoms and even molecules have been shown to be wave-like. Before the acceptance of the de Broglie hypothesis, diffraction was a property that was thought to be exhibited only by waves. Therefore, the presence of any diffraction effects by matter demonstrated the wave-like nature of matter. When the de Broglie wavelength was inserted into the Bragg condition, the observed diffraction pattern was predicted, thereby experimentally confirming the de Broglie hypothesis for electrons. Experiments with Fresnel diffraction and an atomic mirror for specular reflection of neutral atoms confirm the application of the de Broglie hypothesis to atoms, that is, the existence of atomic waves which undergo diffraction, interference and allow quantum reflection by the tails of the attractive potential. Now that we have understood the concept of matter and the de Broglie's relation, let us now try to learn about deriving the de Broglie wavelength. De Broglie derived his equation using well established theories through the following series of substitutions. Number first, de Broglie first used Einstein's famous equation relating matter and energy, which is given by E is equal to mc square, with E as energy, m as mass and c as the speed of light. Number second, using Planck's theory, which states every quantum of a wave has a discrete amount of energy given by Planck's equation, that is, E is equal to h nu, with E as energy, h as the Planck's constant, v as frequency. Number third, since de Broglie believed particles and wave have the same traits, he hypothesized that the two energies would be equal, that is, mc square is equal to h nu. Number fourth, because real particles do not travel at the speed of light, de Broglie submitted velocity for the speed of light, that is, mv square is equal to h nu divided by lambda. And number fifth, through the equation lambda, de Broglie substituted v divided by lambda for v and arrived at the final expression that relates wavelength and particles with speed, that is, mv square is equal to h nu divided by lambda. Hence, lambda is equal to h nu divided by mv square is equal to h divided by mv. Now, let us discuss the next part of our today's lecture, that is Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The uncertainty principle is one of the most famous and probably misunderstood ideas in physics. It tells us that there is a fuzziness in nature, that is a fundamental limit to what we can know about the behavior of quantum particles and therefore the smallest scales of nature. Of these scales, the most we can hope for is to calculate probabilities for where things are and how they will behave. Unlike Newton's clockwork universe, where everything follows clear-cut laws on how to move and prediction is easy if you know the starting conditions, the uncertainty principle enshrines a level of fuzziness into quantum theory. Werner Heisenberg's simple idea tells us why atoms don't implode, how the sun manages to shine, and strangely that the vacuum of space is not actually empty. An early incarnation of the uncertainty principle appeared in a 1927 paper by Heisenberg, a German physicist who was working at Niels Bohr's Institute in Copenhagen at the time, titled "On the Perceptual Content of Quantum Theoretical Kinematics and Mechanics." The more familiar form of the equation came a few years later when he had further refined his thoughts in subsequent lectures and papers. Heisenberg was working through the implications of quantum theory, a strange new way of explaining how atoms behaved that had been developed by physicists including Niels Bohr, Paul Dirac and Erwin Schrödinger over the previous decade. Among its many counterintuitive ideas, quantum theory proposed that energy was not continuous but instead came in discrete packets, that is quanta, and that light could be described as both a wave and a stream of these quanta. The uncertainty principle says that we cannot measure the position x and the momentum p of a particle with absolute precision. The more accurately we know one of these values, the less accurately we know the other. Multiplying together the errors in the measurements of these values has to give a number greater than or equal to half of a constant called h bar. This is equal to Planck's constant, usually written as h divided by 2 pi. Planck's constant is an important number in quantum theory, a way to measure the granularity of the world at its smallest scales, and it has the value of 6.626 multiplied by 10 raised power minus 34 joule seconds. Heisenberg's idea can also explain a type of nuclear radiation called alpha decay. Alpha particles are 2 protons and 2 neutrons emitted by some heavy nuclei such as uranium-238. Usually these are bound inside the heavy nucleus and would need lots of energy to break the bonds keeping them in place. But because an alpha particle inside a nucleus has a very well defined velocity, its position is not so well defined. That means there is a small but non-zero chance that the particle could at some point find itself outside the nucleus, even though it technically does not have enough energy to escape. When this happens, a process metaphorically known as quantum tunneling, because the escaping particle has to somehow dig its way through an energy barrier that it cannot leap over, that is, the alpha particles escape and we see radioactivity. Now at last, let us discuss the need of a new approach to atomic structure. An atom is the smallest constituent unit of ordinary matter that has the properties of a chemical element. Every solid, liquid, gas and plasma is composed of neutral or ionized atoms. Atoms are very small. Typical sizes are around 100 picometer, which is 10 billionth of a meter. However, atoms do not have well defined boundaries and there are different ways to define their size that give different but close values. Atoms are small enough that attempting to predict their behavior using classical physics as if they were billiard balls, for example, gives noticeably incorrect predictions due to quantum effects. Through the development of physics, atomic models have incorporated quantum principles to better explain and predict the behavior. In 1913, the physicist Niels Bohr proposed a model in which the electrons of an atom were assumed to orbit the nucleus but could only do so in a finite set of orbits and could jump between these orbits only in discrete changes of energy corresponding to absorption or radiation of a photon. This quantization was used to explain why the electron orbits are stable and why elements absorb and emit electromagnetic radiation in discrete spectra. Later in the same year, Henry Moseley provided additional experimental evidence in favor of Niels Bohr's theory. These results refined Ernest Rutherford's and Antonius van den Broek's model, which proposed that the atom contains in its nucleus a number of positive nuclear charges that is equal to its atomic number in the periodic table. Until these experiments, atomic number was not known to be a physical and experimental quantity. That it is equal to the atomic nuclear charge remains the accepted atomic model today. Though the word atom originally denoted a particle that cannot be cut into smaller particles, in modern scientific usage, the atom is composed of various subatomic particles. The constituent particles of an atom are the electron, the proton and the neutron. All three are fermions. The electron is by far the least massive of these particles at 9.11 multiplied by 10 raised power minus 31 kg with a negative electrical charge and a size that is too small to be measured using available techniques. It is the lightest particle with the positive rest mass measured. Under ordinary conditions, electrons are bound to the positively charged nucleus by the attraction created from opposite electric charges. All the bound protons and neutrons in an atom make up a tiny atomic nucleus and are collectively called nucleons. This is much smaller than the radius of the atom, which is of the order of 10 raised power 5 fermions. The nucleons are bound together by a short-ranged attractive potential called the residual strong force. At distance smaller than 2.5 fermions, this force is much more powerful than the electrostatic force that causes positively charged protons to repel each other. The electrons in an atom are attracted to the protons in the nucleus by the electromagnetic force. This force binds the electrons inside an electrostatic potential well surrounding the smaller nucleus, which means that an external source of energy is needed for the electron to escape. The closer an electron is to the nucleus, the greater the attractive force. Hence, electrons bound near the center of the potential will require more energy to escape than those at greater separations. The electron can change its state to a higher energy level by absorbing a photon with sufficient energy to boost it into the new quantum state. Likewise, through spontaneous emission, an electron in a higher energy state can drop to a lower energy state while radiating the excess energy as a photon. These characteristic energy values, defined by the differences in the energies of the quantum states, are responsible for the atomic spectral lines. Now, at last coming to the limitations of the Bohr's model. Number first, Bohr's model of atom could not explain the spectra of atoms containing more than one electron. It failed even for the simple helium atom, which has only 2 electrons. Number second, although Bohr's model was successful in explaining the spectra of hydrogen atom and hydrogen-like systems such as He positive, Li2 positive, it could not account for the fine structure in the spectrum observed using refined spectroscopic techniques. Number third, Bohr's theory was also unable to account for the splitting of the spectral lines in the presence of a magnetic field, that is Zeeman effect, or an electric field, that is Stark effect. Number four, Bohr proposed a two-dimensional or flat model of the atom, which now has become obsolete as it has been established that atom is a three-dimensional entity. Number fifth, it also failed to account for Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Number six, it failed to account for the shapes of molecules. In view of the shortcomings of the Bohr model, attempts were made to develop a more suitable and general model for atom. Two important developments that contributed significantly in the formulation of such a model were dual behavior of matter and Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The enormous wealth of macromolecular structure data already available and the even greater wealth soon to come from structural genomics, from the push for atomic resolution structures and from the push to solve much larger biological complexes provide a treasure trove of functional, interactional and evolutionary data that will change how one can do biology. But in order to make effective use of this great resource, it is important, among other things, to take into account the very large spread of accuracy in those data. Relatively low resolution structures can be among the most valuable if they are of critical molecules or of large and complex cellular machinery. These structures show overall fold and relative positioning of their parts, and they often illuminate function in surprising ways, but one should not expect to learn from them fine details in an active site or critical differences that determine substrate or inhibitor specificity. At the other extreme, increasing numbers of structures are being solved at better than 1 angstrom resolution, where one can reliably detect minute changes and disentangle multiple conformations of side chains and waters. Within a given structure, there can be even wider variability in quality. Regardless of resolution, most structures have some parts disordered enough that they are not visible in a crystallographic electron density map or have no observable NMR constraints. That's all about today's lecture. Hope you have understood it well. Thank you very much and goodbye.